currently the CIO and Managing Director for Advanced Assessments at Nuvik. Previously did a lot of red teaming work, do a lot of consulting, penetration testing, red teaming for our clients, depending on what they need. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn. If you want to follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn, I accept everyone, so just feel free to shoot that over. So with that, we've been focusing a lot lately on a lot of cloud research that we've been doing and taking a look at what's accessible out there and just going through and enumerating buckets and Azure storage that's open, wide open, people can get access to, go in and pull anything out that they want. So with that anonymous access, we're able to go in and just see what's there. So I started doing that. Started going through, pulling out buckets, taking a look at what's there, started finding some really interesting things as I was going through and pulling everything out and taking a look at it. Started it out with pulling down some interesting files. I was going through and pulling them down, downloading everything in a certain bucket, and all of a sudden, I ran out of space on my system. No more space on my test VMs, my lab systems to go and do it. So next thing I needed to do was go and get storage. So I went and got 96 terabytes of storage, needed more. Still wasn't enough. I've figured out a way to fill that up surprisingly. Thank God my ISP doesn't have any bandwidth caps on me pulling this down. So that's been great. But what I've been doing now that I had more storage was actually going out and just searching for files that had interesting names. Going through some of these buckets that are out there, publicly accessible, found them through various different means. Gray Hat Warfare is a great one out there for going and searching through buckets, going out, just brute forcing them to go and see what's out there, trying to figure out names, see what I can get access to, start taking a look at it. So I started looking for some basic things, PS1 files, batch files, command files, with install in the name, and just seeing what I could find. Got a number of hits. In this case, one I'll be talking about today is an Azure Storage blob that allowed anonymous access and was able to go and start pulling these down. So I just decided to start pulling down all of it to review and going through all of it. And once I pulled it down, I started going through and taking a look for different specific keywords. So I started going through password, repping through, searching through. Is there anything there that I can find? Anything strange there? Any keys that are in those files? Anything else that you could think might be interesting? Secrets, anything to that effect, and just started going through those files, see what's there, what I could pull in, what's available to me, and do this for a number of different buckets as I'm coming across them over time. So was doing that, pulling all these down, and started coming across some pretty interesting stuff, especially here with this one bucket. And it's been really hard for me to figure out which ones are interesting to me, which ones are not interesting to me when going through and just doing these searches for random items. So right now, it's mostly just a gut feeling when I'm taking a look, seeing what the contents are, some of the initial files that I'm finding during my bigger searches, and then going down to actually going and pulling down the entire bucket or entire blob and starting to really tear things apart to see what I have access to. In this case, I started reviewing all the PowerShell scripts that were in this one bucket after I found single file with install.cmd. Now, if you notice in here, there's something very interesting that I saw in the scripts. There were emails hard-coded into the script for Microsoft's email addresses. So that was interesting to me, but didn't know too much yet. I'm just starting to get going on this, pulling it apart. I think this was either Friday night or Saturday morning on the weekend, just going and taking a look at this, wanting to go through and getting intrigued with what I was finding at this point. So I was like, that's interesting. So I start searching through the entire blob to go and start pulling out more and see what else is in there. And I find more Microsoft email addresses in here. So I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure this blob at this point belongs to Microsoft. Going and taking a look at it. Doing some more work and sort of pulling some things out, I was able to figure out it belonged to what I believe to be the development team for SCCM over at Microsoft. Either the development team, test team, QA team, I don't know exactly. I was never able to get confirmation for who it belonged to, but that's what I had believed it to be for. So I kept going through and kept taking a look at everything that's in there. Really wanted to just figure out what I have access to. And this is largely what a lot of the research that I've been doing around is taking a look what's in buckets and what I'm finding there to actually leverage it to gain access, whether it's to the cloud environment, to an on-prem network, getting access to VPNs and just seeing what's there and finding different interesting ways to actually get there. In this case, kept going through, and I found one script in there called MailHelper Script. So I was like, all right, let's take a look at this. Let's pull it apart. Went in, started looking at it, found there's this Azure website here that actually gets a API call to it to go and send an email. Started testing it out, and if you notice, right there on the end, there's that URL key, and without having that key to actually send it, don't have access to the API. So things were failing for quite a bit of time to actually go and try and send an email or at least make a successful web call to the API. So kept going in there, trying to figure out, all right, I'm missing something here. Like, what am I missing? And then looking back in the script, like trying to figure out, start backtracing where this URL key comes from, trying to figure it out. And the entire blob was probably, I think it was around 25 gigs or so of just lots of scripts, a couple of ISO files, but mostly a lot of scripts and different iterations of them as they were being developed. So lots of different versions of the same thing and sort of seeing how it was evolving over time. So found a number of different versions of these different scripts and ended up going over to one of the other scripts that I had found in there called the log helper script. So I'd taken a look at this one and looking at it, trying to figure out, what do I have here? Like, what's going on? What is this? And I see that there's this executable that they're actually running here up top, key.exe. Like, what is this? Trying to figure it out. Fortunately, like looking through it, seeing what the tool path is, figuring out what that is, it was actually calling something in a different directory on disk, so not something that's in the cloud. But I do see that it's calling this executable and running it with an argument of mailsig. So figuring that out, trying to figure out just what's going on. It's like reverse engineering, exactly like the PowerShell script here, to figure out how this is all working and trying to really piece it back together from what's sitting out there. And all public, anyone could go and download this. I don't know if anyone else did. I definitely did see in one of the blobs, somebody wrote a file that it was vulnerable to being written to. So just, you never know what you're going to find here. So going through, just taking a look at it, key.exe, what's going on here? Is this executable just going to go and give me the keys magically to start interacting with this API? So I went and started finding it. I found in the path there that it's keys.exe. I start searching through, trying to see what I can find. At first, I was coming up a little bit empty, trying to find the executable, because most of the folders and such that I had to go and look through, most of them were empty, not finding it. The executable wasn't there. Eventually, I found two different versions of it. One looks more like the production version, but still some debug stuff there, as well as another version with a slightly different name there down at the bottom, the Microsoft Configuration Management Test Key Vault. So I start going through and taking a look and trying to figure it out. But the keys.exe and the keyvault.exe, they're very different applications, but they both had the same functionality I was taking a look at. So got interested here in the renew key vault .cert command. So I open it up, start taking a look at this file, and I see how this different commands being run with this file. So reading it here, like revoke existing certificate, add the new certificate, get admin password from Key Vault and using the new certificate and going and pulling this down. That sounded interesting to me. But I actually went to go and run it, and I got an error right away that I couldn't authenticate because I didn't have a certificate to go and actually authenticate. So I needed a certificate to even get some of the initial authentication. The other way to actually get it running was to do interactive authentication into the Azure AD tenant, which I did not have credentials for. So a little bit of a dead end here, trying to figure this out, trying to see exactly where to go next. Started trying to then see, are there any certificates that I have? Can I get anything? Whatever reason, using PowerShell to go and search for a string, coming back with certificate was failing me. Switched over to grep. Look at that. All of a sudden, I found in the scripts a reference to some certificates getting imported to go and pull them out. So I started taking a look. I couldn't find anything exactly with that name getting imported, but taking a look a little bit further, and it didn't dawn on me for a little bit looking at the import command there. But then taking a look over time, going through different areas and such, realized that it's importing the certificate with the private key and there's no password on it. So start going through and just trying to figure out what's going on. Like, why would you put a certificate in there that has no password? that you're using for authentication, like one of the basic things that we have. And with that, some of the other things, I did find some pretty strange comments throughout a lot of these different scripts that are out there, like, hey, we can't do this. This is against policy, or don't do this. So not something I could bring up here with some of the language that was in there, but definitely interesting seeing all those comments in there from the developers and the team working on this and how things changed over time. So I went and was like, this is too good to be true to actually just import this certificate without any password. I still wasn't believing it at that point. So I actually went through the GUI to like double check and make sure. And yeah, I was able to import that certificate without a problem, and went to go and double check and check on the back end. And magically that certificate was there in my local key store at that point. So, all right, I've got it imported, I have access to it, and you do see the expiration dates on here. These were accurate expiration dates at this point. This was something from back earlier on in the year when I had found everything. And okay, great. I've got it now. I've got it imported. There's this keys file. I don't completely understand exactly what's happening with everything here, and wanted to sort of figure out more to really understand a lot of what was going on there behind the scenes. So sitting there scratching my head, took a break for a couple of days, didn't have time. I'm like, you know what? Let me go back. Let me take a look at this executable, see what's going on here. So I used JetBrains to decompile the key.exe, and thankfully it was all in .NET. It made it really easy for me. So I started taking a look here and start seeing some stuff here hard-coded, as you're seeing here on the slide, like the different the vault URL. So now I've got an Azure Key Vault potentially have access to, as well as the application ID. The certificate name matches the one that I had imported there into the certificate store earlier on. So things are starting to match up. Things are starting to come together here, trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And it looks like it's actually going and trying to pull the secrets from the key vault, and it's using the certificate for authentication. That's something I haven't done before, using the certificate to authenticate to a key vault. Usually I'm using something else, whether it's application credentials for Azure, or going in actually just an active session to go and import it and then start interacting with Azure to go and pull these things. But I haven't used a certificate before to go and authenticate against the key vault at that point. So I start going ahead and building out my own program at this point to go and start interacting and start pulling the certificates out. In this case, I was just pulling out, if you see down at the bottom, one of the certificates that I saw in one of the scripts listed to go and pull down just to see if I'm doing this right. Can I actually pull it out? And I was able to get the password back for that Azure AD join test account. So start pulling secrets back out of that specific key vault. Authentication is working great. That's awesome. Was able to get things going. And I feel like I'm on a solid path at this point. So next thing I want to do, like, all right, I got one secret. I don't know the names to all these different secrets because they're not anywhere in the files that I have. Where do I go next? So I start going through, reading all the documentation out there for the APIs and starting to read the .NET documentation for Azure AD. And I start seeing different things out there and just trying them at this point to see if I can start pulling down all these various different secrets. And this is something I'm going to be cleaning it up and posting it out to my GitHub eventually for this, because it could be used by anyone at this point now once you pull out some of these certificates. But I was able to actually go and start figuring out here a way to go and just enumerate and step through all the various different secrets that were in this key vault without actually having the name of them. So I started going through and had to use two different functions here to really just go and start pulling it out, start getting them, iterating them through, and then only pulling it out if access failed, just sort of abandon and skip to that one and just move on to the next one at that point. It had turned out that certificate that I was using had expired, and I didn't have any of the checks in my code to make sure that certificate was still working. So luckily, I was able to go back to that keys.exe. I was able to use that certificate to then generate a new certificate and get access back again. And then all of a sudden, everything finally just came back to me and worked. I was able to go and just dump out all the entire secrets from this key vault and start taking a look at them. These were passwords that were in there for various different test environments that it looks like the SCCM team was using to go and actually test things out there, various different accounts, pulling these credentials out, and just pulling it all down. Okay, that's cool. I was able to go and dump those without actually knowing it, and things worked. Like I was pretty happy at this point. Um, Started going, okay, well, I got that. Like, what else is there here? And I start going back and looking, and there was one thing I don't want to say I ignored, but didn't circle back around to, and that was going through all these various different scripts. There were references to other Azure blobs out there, different storage accounts and such that it was actually using the same keys.exe to go and get access to. So going back and looking at that, like, okay, we're doing this and then pulling a temp query key. That's what they're calling it here. So I'm taking a look at this, working on it, start searching back through all the files to try and figure out all these different blobs and such that I have access to, going through the different portions of them to figure it out. And yeah, when I got back, when running this, I took the keys.exe, ran it with temp query key, and I got a SAS token. For those that aren't aware of it, SAS token is basically like a signed URL for an AWS S3 bucket. It's basically authentication to go and access that resource for a predefined period of time. Now, they can be generated either widely to give you access across an entire bucket, or they can be generated to just work for a single file. In this case, the token that I got back allowed me access to multiple different Azure blobs at this point to be able to go and authenticate. And that screenshot down there at the bottom is actually from the Azure Storage Explorer. Great tool. If you're ever trying to go and start working with these, it does support doing anonymous access. So you can go and start adding in a bucket to take a look at it, poking around, using things. You can mass download the files as well with it. Great application for Microsoft for both working with your own buckets and in this case, just going and enumerating some of the anonymous ones out there. So really was using it to go and start taking a look, going through all these other different files. Just so much that's there. It's overwhelming at this point, the amount of data I've gotten myself into taking a look at these things. And this is just one single bucket that I found, or blob in this case, that I found that led me to where I am right now. I found that actually on some of those other blobs, there were RDP files with credentials in them to go and access a lot of these environments they were using. So the SCCM team appeared to be using these scripts to actually go and spin up test environments for new versions of SCCM. I can't confirm it. I didn't hear back from Microsoft about that at all, but that's what it appeared to be. And as they did that, they would have the credentials generated, stored, saved in one of the other shares or other blobs to go and look at, and use that then to go and test and make sure everything was looking properly and had full access to all these different items as a result of just the one blob being open. As you can see here, there ended up being 3 different blobs overall that were open in the end. One was for virtual hard drives, which was really just a lot of ISOs and such for building out their systems that they had. The source folder turned out to be one of their source code for, not source code, but the source for installations of the various different tools, installing SQL Server, installing various different Microsoft applications, databases, and such to go and start putting everything together and taking a look at it, building out the environment. And then the work one, which is where all the scripts that I had found and initially were going through with the install search with CMD. And that's the one that I had found and was really spent most of my time on going through the entire time. Now, the temp one and the attachment ones were the ones that were a little more interesting. It did require that SAS token, which I could confirm I had access with at that point from everything else in the blob. But went in, the attachment had actually those RDP config files for RDP Manager. Luckily, the credentials were actually encrypted and not able to use them directly to go and start accessing those systems and interacting. The temp folder there had the configurations from each of the environments they were building out. So a number of different SCCM configs. There were probably thousands over the years that they had this in place, where there was all the config files that were just sitting there, ripe for the taking to go and start taking a look. Luckily, this was just what appeared to be their development and test environment for what they're releasing to production. So that's why I felt safe giving this talk. Did let Microsoft know. And within 6 days, they actually had closed this down, closed all the access down to these blobs. They fixed everything and taken a look at it. And I started thinking back through things at that point, like what I had found here and different things. And I was like, wow, there was an application here that would send emails internally to Microsoft individuals. And I'm guessing it would have come from an internal email address at that point. Access was shut down. I wasn't able to go back and do any of that testing, but I started wondering if that would have been interesting, using that for phishing internal people at Microsoft, or trying to go and phish people externally coming from a Microsoft email address. My mind just starts going down those crazy rabbit holes of what could I have used this for if I had my evil hat on. Didn't go that route, reported it to Microsoft, let them fix it, get everything taken care of. And unfortunately, this is a common problem that we do see across a whole ton of companies, with just leaving open access out there to blobs, whether it's inadvertently, only meant to do it for a little bit to get something up and running, and then don't come back. But it's a problem we're continually seeing, and the research that we've been doing and items that we're finding, some cases I found backups of domain controllers from the internal environment, monthly backups sitting out there. Now that's another one that was remediated and fixed, but these are the things that we're finding on public cloud storage that anyone driving by can go and pull down and download to their local machine. It's pretty scary at times with a lot of the items that we found. But with that, there are ways to prevent this. With AWS, you can do signed URLs for access. To only provide access to specific files for a certain time. You can scope it to buckets. Azure has SaaS tokens that you can use with the URLs as well to access them and start breaking things down that way. DigitalOcean, Google Cloud also signed URLs. So there's ways out there to do it, but I would recommend going and taking a look at your cloud environment on a regular basis. Go out there. What do you have that's exposed? Take a look at all of your accounts. Go back through those exceptions that you have of, oh, this one's allowed to be public. What's the actual content that's sitting there? Is anyone actually looking at that content? Because in a lot of cases, and I have to give credit, there's one other company that I had found some data of theirs sitting in this, similarly for building and deploying other systems in a private cloud in this case, and reached out and talked with them, got the CISO on the phone, let them know what was found. Pretty concerning about it. And luckily, it was already on their radar, and they were in the process of already remediating it. So it was great to hear in that case that they were actually going ahead and fixing things and getting it taken care of for them. So it's great to hear it when you have that, see that happening. But it's a common problem. Companies are heading in the right direction. Go and see what you have, because there can be some pretty damaging stuff out there, or at least once you start tearing it apart, like I did in this case, and seeing what I actually could gain access to from what looked a little bit innocuous at first of just an install script, can really be damaging and could really hurt a company. So Microsoft thankfully fixed this in a couple of days. And with that, that's my talk for today and how I compromised the cloud provider's cloud.
Thank you, Dave. No, that was amazing. So we had a lot of chatter in the Discord, a lot of people real interested in what you're doing. So we had a few things that just want to get some confirmation on. So a lot of them are from High Tech Soul. And one of the things that they were pondering is if they would apply source IP controls of who can call the key vault, would that make it game over?
In this case, that would have made it game over, at least for me getting access to that system. But you have to take that into consideration too, of how you're using things daily on a programmatically basis. They were building entire networks in the cloud with, I'm guessing, probably ephemeral IP addresses that were changing for each test build that they were doing. So in this case, they were probably actually needed to leave that wide open. So that's a good control if that's something that you can use and you have all of your traffic going out of a single IP, but it may not be applicable in all cases.
All right, we also got OX Bleep here. Where did keys.exe come from?
I found it in that 25 gigabytes of files that I had downloaded to the system. So found it in there. There was a lot of folders that just had some scripts within it. And then there were some other folders, and I just found there were only a couple of copies of that executable that I'd found, because there were probably about 100 different iterations of the same set of code there overall. So at some point, it was built out and put in there. I could probably look at the build date to figure out when they had done it, but I had found it by searching through all the various different files that I pulled down.
Nice. And last question, kind of statement, right? Again, from High Tech Soul. Azure Defender for Cloud would alert on these misconfigurations. Is that correct, or is that something that needs to be configured in Azure Defender?
I think you would need to configure it within Azure Defender depending on what your typical behavior is. It should alert on massive downloads that are going on and pulling this data out of the environment if it's set up and actually monitoring. And I know that's on the higher end of Microsoft's, I think you have to have E5. I could be wrong with that. E5 licensing, and then add on Defender for Cloud to even monitor for things like this coming down from those Azure blobs.
Excellent. So, Dave, thank you so much for coming to the summit, sharing your knowledge, dropping that elbow of knowledge on everyone. Very much appreciated.
Thank you. Enjoying being here.
Thanks for watching. Achieve your next level of skills with training courses at antisyphontraining.com.